I had next to no frame of reference when I downloaded Limbus Company on its release earlier this week. Trailers demonstrated some slick turn-based combat animations, and it had a shocking amount of positive reviews for a game that seemingly came out of nowhere. For the low price of free, I checked it out to see what all the fuss was about. And on the other side of about 10 hours, I totally see what the fuss was about. It has some really crazy ideas. The game's hub is this bus that looks like a train that eats people to fuel its tour deep through metaphorical hell. It has this really consistent voice as it shows you its oppressive world through the perspective of its core cast. But at the same time, it doesn't exactly tee itself up to be easy to recommend. Because ultimately all of the good about Limbus Company is tied up in its controversial free-to-play gacha structure that may not be an excellent fit for the game's story focus. This game was developed for a very specific kind of person, one who embraces the broad strokes of their progression being made in weeks or months instead of days. I don't suspect that I've got many more stops left before I decide to end my journey, but damn if I'm not glad I got on the bus. Limbus Company calls itself a vicious, sin-resonating RPG. But if you're looking for something a little bit more comprehensible, it's a free-to-play gacha RPG with a large emphasis on lore and story. If you're wondering how a title with those attributes was able to come out of the gate without being tied to a major IP and somehow able to avoid complete lambasting, it's probably thanks to its studio pedigree. Limbus Company inherited existing fans by virtue of ProjectMoon, the Korean-based indie studio responsible for Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina, two games that were incredibly well received, though regrettably ones I haven't played personally. And that was very apparent the second I booted the game up. If there's one thing Limbus Company isn't, it's approachable. It dumps you into its world filled with sentient human-like pests and insects trying to carve out a life in its urban hellscape where blocks and districts are territory divided among corporations, and in universe terms get thrown around at a frequency that expects you've come in prepared. What ended up being my life raft, and how I eventually did grow to love this kind of weird story, is from an area I could not have predicted. Early on, my clock-faced protagonist was saved from certain death by a woman named Faust. We're probably going to regret that later. Then it was revealed that our player character is named Dante, and as the rest of the cast rolled in, it dawned on me what I was actually playing. Because in place of where a big budget license would be to carry the gacha and collection systems is instead replaced by literature, borrowing on globally identifiable characters from epic poetry and novels. I'd be lying if I said I knew who everyone was, but it uses these references to great effect, acting as this anchor to ground its otherwise otherworldly premise. Certain characters not only have their personality defined by their namesake, but also their designs and their special attacks. I may not have ever finished Moby Dick, but damn it if I'm not here for anime girl Ishmael. The end result is that we have a cast and story that's kind of like the video game equivalent of that section in Barnes & Noble with all the feminist reinterpretations of Greek mythology, except we're not limited to a particular pantheon here. It's a postmodern lit class lesson viewed through the lens of anime body horror, and I kind of live for it. Out of all the games I've experienced that have an autoplay button, this one's probably the most academic. If that sounds appealing to you, then you owe it to yourself to give this one a try. But I'm kind of stuck in that give it a try level of recommendation rather than it being something I could say with my whole chest, largely because of gameplay and structure. Yes, Limbus Company is a gacha, and the UI doesn't try to hide the fact that it was built for mobile parity. It feels stupid to review a gacha and then criticize it for being a gacha, but I don't think that's the entirety of my problem. It's mainly that I don't think the combat at the core of this gacha is all that enticing, and I'm not entirely sure that this genre is a good home for the story-focused experience that Limbus Company so obviously is. The different districts of the city are divided into different chapters, each one broken down into a linear path of simple combat missions and story sequences that'll eventually culminate into a chapter-ending dungeon that acts almost as a miniature roguelike within itself. The missions themselves are gated by timed currency, which, to be fair, wasn't even a major factor until somewhere around the 7-hour mark for me, with the steady level ups that come with early progression letting you make serious headway in the story without the need to wait till the next day. But I wouldn't suggest that Limbus Company is respectful of your time. Most of these encounters are pretty explicitly retreads of defeating the same basic enemies over and over, with little in the way of strategic diversity until you hit the chapter-ending boss fights. Read any guide and you'll be sure to find that there is a tremendous amount of decision-making going on here, but so much of it is pre-fight decision-making about who you're bringing to make the best synergies. Once you're actually in that fight, you're kind of just selecting between one of two attacks at a time on this chain at the bottom of your screen. The idea is that your party is fighting simultaneously, and chaining attacks together of shared affinities can lead to both damage bonuses as well as points to stockpile towards ultimate abilities. It's serviceable and damn is it flashy when it resolves all at once, but two major attributes are out of your control. Target selection is automated, so you can't do much in the way of prioritizing who to kill first, and coin flips on each clash represent pretty drastic shifts in power. Most of the time my battles weren't won and lost by the decisions I made within them, but the decisions I made before them. In my experience, a well-prepared and selected unit will almost always win regardless of what buttons you hit, but the inverse is also true. It makes you wonder why they didn't just go all the way and make this an auto-battler, because that's kind of what it feels like, albeit one where you need to go through the motions anyway. There is an auto-resolve combat button that you can unlock for repeat playthroughs through particular missions, but it's one that needs to be manually clicked every single turn, defeating much of its purpose in the first place. It doesn't help that the tutorial is nigh incomprehensible and front-loads you with all the mechanics before you've had a chance to understand the basics. Do yourself a favor. If you're thinking about giving this one a download, go and review one of the community-made guides online first. They were an instrumental tool for getting myself acclimated to the moment-to-moment. But really it's the story structure that I think is most incompatible with how I normally consume games. Because what's here is good and what I've experienced I liked, but signing on day after day to get tiny morsels of story is just not what I'm looking to do. Obviously I didn't finish this game because it's not really a game that can be finished in the conventional sense. It's something that ProjectMoon is no doubt hoping you'll come back to for years to come. And while I liked what I saw, I don't think I'll be going back. The 10-hour mark was my exit point because it's where I started to get the most pushback in terms of grind requirement to get the next small morsel of story. And if I wanted to commit another 10 hours, it makes me wonder if that wouldn't just be time better spent playing its predecessors that you can just pay money for, or maybe even committing some time to the literary classics from which it pulls. I can recommend it something you try given the low stakes of its lack of entry cost. But if you're looking to see if this is something you can commit to long term, I'd say you probably gotta wait for a second round of reviews about a month or two from now. Because much like the literary classics from which it pulls, experiencing Limbus Company is a commitment. Both the complexity of its upgrades and progression and the literary depth from which it pulls demand a lot from you, and if you're like me, you'll almost certainly need to resort to outside help. But unlike the literary classics, there's no final page. The demands of a live service narrative-focused gacha game require a story that's intentionally slow to get through and may never end satisfyingly. Though I enjoyed the time I did spend with it, part of me wishes it was a book you could close, rather than deciding when you want to walk away from it.